For more than 30 years, North American trade rested on a simple belief that the system would remain predictable. Businesses planned investments decades ahead, supply chains stretched across borders without fear, and governments assumed stability was permanent. That assumption is now being tested, not by a recession or a global crisis, but by political uncertainty coming from the very country that once guaranteed continuity. The United States is openly questioning the future of its own trade agreement with Canada and Mexico, and the consequences of that uncertainty are already being felt, even though no official deadline has arrived. The agreement at the center of this shift is the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which replaced NAFTA in July 2020. Under its design, all three countries agreed to a mandatory review in 2026. If the review is successful, the deal continues for another 16 years, extending stability until 2042. If any country objects, the agreement does not immediately collapse, but it moves into annual reviews. For Canada and Mexico, that annual uncertainty is not a technical detail. It directly affects long-term investment, factory planning, and employment decisions across multiple sectors. Donald Trump has repeatedly made it clear that he is willing to use that review as leverage. He has publicly stated that the agreement could be allowed to expire, divided into bilateral deals, or reshaped using national security clauses if Canada and Mexico do not accept demands that go beyond traditional trade negotiations. From Washington's perspective, this approach is designed to apply pressure. From outside the United States, it is increasingly viewed as a warning that stability can no longer be taken for granted. Before we go further, a quick note for our viewers. If you appreciate calm, fact-based reporting without noise or exaggeration, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. It helps us continue this kind of detailed coverage. And as always, the most thoughtful comment will be pinned at the top. What makes this situation different from previous trade disputes is not the threat itself, but how Canada and Mexico are responding. Rather than reacting publicly or escalating rhetoric, both countries have quietly adjusted their approach. Instead of waiting for Washington to define the terms of the future, they are preparing for multiple outcomes. This preparation is not about confrontation, it is about risk management. Behind closed doors, trade coordination between Canada and Mexico has increased. Negotiating positions are being shared more closely than before. Supply chains are being reviewed with one critical question in mind. How exposed are we to sudden political shifts? Manufacturing strategies are being reassessed, not to abandon the U.S. market, but to ensure that no single country holds absolute leverage. For decades, North American industry operated as a deeply integrated system. In the automotive sector alone, a single component can cross the US-Canada border 6 or 7 times before final assembly. Just-in-time delivery systems were designed on the assumption that borders would remain open and predictable. Agriculture followed the same model, with grain, livestock, and processed food moving seamlessly across borders. Energy networks were built on cooperation, not confrontation. That entire system depends on one condition: certainty. Even the possibility of annual renegotiation forces companies to rethink long-term commitments. A factory that costs hundreds of millions of dollars to build cannot be planned on the basis of yearly political approval. Once uncertainty enters the equation, alternatives become more attractive, even if they are less efficient in the short term. Here is the point many observers overlook, and this is crucial. The real decisions about North American trade are not waiting for 2026. They are happening now. Investment committees are already factoring in political risk. Governments are already preparing contingency plans. Supply chains are already being adjusted, quietly and deliberately. This is where Washington's strategy begins to backfire. The intention behind pressure is to extract concessions. The actual result is preparation for independence. Companies do not respond to uncertainty by waiting. They respond by diversifying. Governments do not respond to threats by standing still. They respond by reducing exposure. Canada's approach illustrates this shift clearly. Publicly, Canadian officials continue to emphasize cooperation and stability. There is no dramatic rhetoric, no public escalation. But beneath that calm tone, diversification efforts are accelerating. Trade relationships beyond North America are being strengthened. Infrastructure planning increasingly reflects a world where U.S. trade policy may change suddenly. The goal is not separation. The goal is resilience. Mexico is following a similar path. Rather than allowing itself to be isolated in bilateral negotiations, it is aligning more closely with Canada. The idea is simple. Negotiating as coordinated partners reduces vulnerability. It also ensures that if pressure increases on one country, alternatives already exist. This quiet coordination challenges a long-standing assumption in Washington that leverage works best when applied individually. That assumption depends on fragmentation. When partners coordinate, leverage weakens. The irony is that this shift alarms American industry as much as it concerns foreign governments. U.S. manufacturers benefit enormously from integrated North American supply chains. Disruption increases costs, delays production, and ultimately raises prices for consumers. Many businesses fear that political uncertainty could permanently damage systems that took decades to build. What began as an effort to assert control is accelerating the very outcome it was meant to prevent. Instead of forcing compliance, uncertainty encourages alternatives. Instead of reinforcing dependence, it motivates preparation for exit scenarios. Once those preparations are in place, reversing them becomes extremely difficult. This is why focusing only on the 2026 review misses the larger story. By the time formal negotiations begin, many decisions will already be locked in. Investment locations chosen today will shape trade flows for decades. Supply chain adjustments made quietly now will define future leverage. Negotiations will not start from a position of dependency, but from a position of calculated distance. Before we close, a brief reminder. If this kind of in-depth, calm analysis is useful to you, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support allows us to continue producing detailed, fact-based reporting. And remember, the best comment will be pinned at the top. This situation is not simply a trade dispute. It is a lesson in how power operates in a connected world. Pressure only works when alternatives do not exist. Threats only succeed when trust remains intact. Once unpredictability replaces trust, adaptation becomes inevitable. What we are witnessing is not the collapse of North American trade, but its quiet transformation. The system is adjusting to new realities, not through headlines, but through planning. The final outcome may not be decided in a negotiating room in 2026, but in the choices already being made today. This is not the story of a renegotiation. It is the story of what happens when leverage meets preparation, and why the consequences may last far longer than anyone expected.